listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Thursday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over and see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. At the same time, come on over and join the other Intrepids on the live chat room over on the video simulcast of this program on my YouTube channel. And that's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. I almost forgot where I was going. I had a Joe Biden moment. So, you know, the thing. All right, so let's move on. We just finished yesterday talking about the Kiowas and Setanta and Lone Wolf and the different chiefs and the clearing of the buffalo, and how this was one of the strategies of the United States government. If you take away the source of food for these people, you're going to force them to do what you want them to do, which is become agricultural, go to the reservations, plant food, and not roam the prairies looking for food and hunting. And this was a whole change of life for them. And that going from millions upon millions of buffalo down to almost nothing in a 10-year period in the 1860s and 70s. And so we saw how our government treated people. There was also a note I made a couple of days ago that if you notice, when our government wanted to subjugate the Native Americans, what's one of the first things they did once they had them under control or reservation control or were trying to round them up? They made them surrender all their weapons. Now, not only could weapons be used to battle the United States military, they were also what they used to hunt buffalo. Now, it's not that they couldn't make more arrows and bows and lances and things like that, what they'd had before guns came into their sphere of influence, their existence. But this is a point to make, if you would, in current events and all through history of the last century. You notice when any dictator rises to power, when any tyrannical government comes into power in a country, what's one of the first things they do? They disarm the people. And so this is what we did to the Native Americans. We disarmed them. We didn't want them having weapons that they could fight us with. And this is why in our own Constitution, the Second Amendment exists. It was the Second Amendment was written to protect your right to own and bear weapons, to defend the First Amendment, which came right before it, obviously, which was the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. And so, and it was second only to that when they started creating these amendments for the Constitution. And so this is something you'll notice throughout all of the pushing of the Native Americans off of their land and onto reservation territory. And the government wanted their land. And when the government made these treaties, they said, we'll take your land, and for it, we're going to give you blankets and clothing and food and seeds and tools so you can go and plant your gardens or your crops or build a farm. And of course, the United States government rarely, if ever, fulfilled any of these obligations. And this is what turned then the Native American tribes back to saying, look, our people are starving, we got to go hunt buffalo. That's the way we've always lived. And of course, that created more conflict. And you've seen this all through this whole series. And we're starting to draw to not an end, but we're well past the midpoint of this series. And tonight, we're going to talk about one that's probably more familiar with most of us, and that is the Dakota Wars, the things that went on over the war for the Black Hills. Now, the Black Hills, for me, aren't very far away. I'm in western Wisconsin, basically the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area, the far extents of it that cross the border into Wisconsin. But if you go straight west of here, and you'll end up in Fargo-Moorhead, which is about 4.5 hour drive from here. That's the border of the Dakotas. And you cross over into South Dakota and North Dakota, anywhere right in there, right along that line, and you're going to start very soon hitting the Black Hills. So it's a mere day's drive for me to get over to the Black Hills. And this is something I want to do with my family, by the way. Yet this summer, hopefully before school starts again. Time's getting shorter. We'll have to see what happens. But I want to take a trip out to the Black Hills and over into Wyoming to see the Greasy Grass, which we know it as the Little Bighorn, and Custer's Last Stand and all of that. That's, for as close as it seems to us, it's one state away. It's about the same distance it takes us to drive from here to Charleston, South Carolina. It's about 900 miles, and in either direction. So it's just going across that long expanse of the Dakotas and the Black Hills. And so in 1875, in May, and by the way, yesterday I think I misquoted. When I was in the chat room last night, I heard myself say it, that the Battle of the Little Bighorn took place in 1874. That's wrong. It took place in 1876. I misspoke last night. And I remember that because it was the same month as our centennial for the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It was in July of 1876. And so we're building up to that now with this war for the Black Hills. And in 1875, on May 1st, here's a little just extra historical data to set context. Indictments were brought against 238 members of the Whiskey Ring, and they were charged with defrauding the Treasury of Internal Revenue taxes. High government officials were involved. That same year, December 6th, the 44th Congress convenes. Democrats control the House of Representatives for the first time since 1859. In 1876, February 7th, President Grant's private secretary, Orville Babcock, acquitted for complicity in the Whiskey Ring frauds. But Grant dismisses him from office anyway. And see, it was a practice even back then. The look of impropriety, sorry, I got to get somebody else to replace you. See ya. And on March 4th, U.S. Congress resolves to impeach Secretary of War Belknap for complicity in Indian Ring frauds. In May 10th, the Centennial Exhibition opens in Philadelphia. And June 11th, Republicans nominate Rutherford B. Hayes for president. And June 27th, the Democrats nominate Samuel J. Tilden for president. And July 9th, massacre of Negro militiamen in Hamburg, South Carolina, took place. August 1st, Colorado admitted to the Union as the 38th state. Now remember, they already had a governor, but they were now officially a state. September, Thomas Edison establishes a laboratory at Melno Park, in New Jersey. September 17th, a race war. You thought it was new in 2020? A race war breaks out in South Carolina. That was September 17th of 1876. On November 7th, both political parties claim victory in the presidential election. Tilden is the winner in the popular vote, but Hayes gets it by the Electoral College. Hayes gets 185 electoral votes, and Tilden had 184. That's how close that race was. I believe now it's 2/3 is what wins. So no white person or persons. Okay, here's the treaty now of 1868, going back about 8 years in the past. The treaty said, no white person or persons shall be permitted to settle upon or occupy any portion of Indian territory, or without the consent of the Indians to pass through the same. Now, what's interesting about that is after 1868, they kept moving the boundaries of the Indian Territory. It wasn't spelled out in the treaty. And so they could continue to go in and alter the treaty. White persons shall not be permitted to settle upon or occupy any portion of Indian Territory. Well, we're just going to shrink the Indian Territory. We want no white men here. The Black Hills belong to me. If the whites try to take them, I will fight. That was Tatanka Yotanka, or we better know him as Sitting Bull, said that. Tashunka Witko, Crazy Horse, said, one does not sell the earth upon which the people walk. One does not sell the earth upon which the people walk. Crazy Horse said that. Baptiste Good said, the white man is in the Black Hills just like maggots, and I want you to get them out just as quick as you can. The chief of all thieves, General Custer, made a road into the Black Hills last summer, and I want the Great Father to pay the damages for what Custer has done. This is not reparations 100 years later. This is damages for what he just did over the last year. Tatoke Iyanke, Running Antelope, said this, the land known as the Black Hills is considered by the Indians as the center of their land. The 10 nations of Sioux are looking toward that as the center of their world. Another quote, the Great Father's young men are going to carry gold away from the Black Hills. I expect they will fill a number of houses with it. In consideration of this, I want my people to be provided for as long as they shall live. This was Matonupa, 2 Bears. Shunkowitko, Fool Dog, said this, the Great Father told the commissioners that all the Indians had rights in the Black Hills, and whatever that conclusion, the Indians themselves should let's see, I read that wrong. And whatever conclusion the Indians themselves should come to would be respected. I am an Indian, and am looked at by the whites as a foolish man, but it must be because I follow the advice of the white man. Matogleska, Spotted Bear, said, our Great Father has a big safe, and so have we. The hill is our safe. We want $70 million for the Black Hills. Put the money away someplace at interest so we can buy livestock. That's the way the white people do. Dead Eyes said, you have put all our heads together and covered them with a blanket. That hill there is our wealth. But you've been asking it from us. You white people, you have all come in our reservation and helped yourselves to our property. And you're not satisfied. You went beyond to take the whole of our safe. I never want to leave this country. All my relatives lying here are in the ground. And when I fall to pieces, I'm going to fall to pieces here. That was a Shunkaha Napin, a wolf necklace. Mawatani Hanska, Long Mandan, said, we have sat and watched them pass here to get gold out and have said nothing. My friends, when I went to Washington, I went into your money house, and I had some young men with me, but none of them took any money out of that house while I was with them. At the same time, when your Great Father's people come into my country, they go into my money house, the Black Hills, and take money out. Very true. Kangi Wiaka, Crowfeather, said this, my friends, for many years we have been in this country. We never go to the Great Father's country and bother him about anything. It is his people who come to our country and bother us, do many bad things, and teach our people to be bad. Before you people ever crossed the ocean to come to this country, and from that time to this, you have never proposed to buy a country that was equal to this in riches. My friends, this country that you've come to buy is the best country that we have. This country is mine. I was raised in it. My forefathers lived and died in it, and I wish to remain in it. Put yourself in the place of these people that are speaking, and more of the people that didn't speak. This is your country. What would you do if somebody came and invaded America today. Or if you're listening in Australia, or England, or Scotland, or Germany, or France, or Northern Africa. What if somebody an invading nation came in and invaded your country? Would you stand and defend your country? This is my country. Another quote, "You have driven away our game and our means of livelihood out of the country." That's the buffalo. "Until now, we have nothing left that is valuable except the hills that you're now asking us to give up. The earth is full of minerals of all kinds, and on the earth, the ground is covered with forests of heavy pine. And when we give these up to the Great Father," meaning the President of the United States, "we know that we give up the last thing that is valuable, either to us or the white people." That's Wanigi Ska, white ghost. And when you think about that, that's the truth. They stripped them of all their land and all their resources. Finally, Najinyunapi, or surrounded is what that means. "When the prairie is on fire, you see animals surrounded by the fire. You see them run and try to hide themselves so that they will not burn. That is the way we are here." Okay. Now, think way back to one of the first parts of this series that we did on Red Cloud and Spotted Tail. And not long after the time of Red Cloud and Spotted Tail and their Teton peoples, the Sioux, settled down on their reservations in the northwestern Nebraska, rumors began to fly among the white settlements that immense amounts of gold were hidden in the Black Hills. Sorry about that, folks. I forgot to silence my phone. Rumors began to fly all around that there were immense amounts of gold hidden in the Black Hills. Pahasapa, the Black Hills, was the center of the world, the place of gods, and the holy mountains where warriors went to speak with the Great Spirit and await visitations. This was the most sacred place for the Native American, not because of the gold, but because of the mountains themselves. But the whites heard that there was gold in them there hills. And so this was the center of the world. And in 1868, the Great Father considered the hills worthless, and he gave them to the Indians forever by treaty. And these black craggy hills, just let them have it, because there was nothing there for the whites. And isn't this the way with, remember we talked about the Bosque Redondo? And it wasn't until just about 40 or 50 years ago that they discovered uranium beneath the Bosque Redondo. Then the U.S. government tried to rescind the treaty again. So they thought the Black Hills were worthless. And so they gave them the Black Hills forever by treaty, in perpetuity. Now, 4 years after that treaty was written, in 1872, white miners were already violating that treaty. They invaded Pahasapa, searching the rocky passes and the clear running streams for the yellow metal which drove white men crazy. When Indians found these crazy white men in their sacred hills, what did they do? They killed them, or they chased them out. And by 1874, there was such a mad clamor from gold-hungry Americans that the Army was ordered to make a reconnaissance into the Black Hills. And the United States government didn't bother to obtain consent from the Indians. After all, this was their land by treaty written just a few years earlier, in perpetuity. They didn't ask for permission before starting this armed invasion of the Black Hills. And although the Treaty of 1868 prohibited entry of white men without the Indians' permission, so what'd they do? Sent in the Army. During the moon of red cherries, more than 1,000 pony soldiers marched across the plains from Fort Abraham Lincoln to the Black Hills. They were the 7th Cavalry, and at their head rode General George Armstrong Custer, the same star chief who in 1868 had slaughtered Black Kettle's Southern Cheyenne on the Washita River. The Sioux called him Pohuska, the long hair. And because they had no warning of his coming, they would only watch from afar as the long columns of blue-uniformed cavalrymen and canvas-covered supply wagons invaded their sacred territory. When Red Cloud heard about Longhair's expedition, he protested. He said, I do not like General Custer and all his soldiers going into the Black Hills, as that is the country of the Oglala Sioux. Now, it was the country of the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, and the other Sioux tribes, and the anger of the Indians was strong enough that the great father, Ulysses S. Grant, announced his determination, quote, to prevent all invasion of this country by intruders so long as by law and treaty it is secured to the Indians. This is what Grant said. Now, of course, this was a little bit before they discovered all the gold there. That was, by the way, you can find that quote from Grant in the New York Herald, August 27th and September 25th of 1874. To prevent all invasion of this country by intruders, so long as by law and treaty it's secured to the Indians. But when Custer reported that the hills were filled with gold, from the grassroots down, was a quote he said, parties of white men began forming like summer locusts, crazy to begin panning and digging for gold in this territory, the Black Hills. The trail that Custer's supply wagons had cut into the heart of Pahasapa soon became known as the Thieves' Road. Red Cloud was having trouble that summer with his reservation agent, J.J. Seville, which we had talked about earlier, over the poor quality of rations and supplies being issued to the Oglala. Preoccupied as he was, Red Cloud failed to assess the full impact upon the Sioux of Custer's intrusion into the Black Hills, especially upon those who left the reservations every spring to hunt and camp near the hills. Like many other aging leaders, Red Cloud was too much involved with petty details, and he was losing touch with the younger tribesmen. Now, in the autumn, following Custer's expedition, the Sioux who had been hunting in the north began returning to the Red Cloud agency. They were angry as hornets over the invasion of Pahasapa, and some talked of forming a war party to go back after the miners who were pouring into the hills, illegally, by the way, in accordance with the treaty. Red Cloud listened to the talk, but advised the young men to be patient. He was sure the Great Father would keep his promise and send soldiers to drive all these miners out. They're violating the treaty. The Great Father's going to send soldiers to drive them white miners out. Of course they will, to abide by the treaty they wrote with us. And in the moon of the falling leaves, however, something happened that made Red Cloud realize just how angry his young men were at the Long Hair's soldiers. On October 22nd, Agent Seville sent some of his white workmen to cut a tall pine and bring the trunk back to the stockade. When the Indians saw the pine pole lying on the ground, they asked Seville what it was going to be used for. A flagpole, the agent told them. He was going to fly a flag over the stockade. The Indians protested. Longhair Custer had flown flags in his camps across the Black Hills. They wanted no flags or anything else in their agency that reminds them of the Bluecoat soldiers. It's their territory. You can't fly your flag here. That would be going like buying a house in Russia and putting up a United States flag. Or stealing land in Russia and building a fort and putting up a flag. Now, Seville just paid no attention to the protests, and in the morning he put his men to work digging a hole for the flagpole, and in a few minutes a band of young warriors came with axes, began chopping the pole to pieces. Seville ordered them to stop, but they paid no attention to him, and the agent strode across to Red Cloud's office and begged him to stop the warriors. Red Cloud refused. He knew the warriors were only expressing their rancor over Longhair's invasion of the Black Hills. They're just chopping down a pole. That's all they're doing. Not attacking anybody. And we got to stop there for this first half of the show. You guys all sit tight, and we'll be right back.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, gang, thanks for sitting on through that break. We're back. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over and see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. At the same time, join the live chat room, which is already going on full tilt over on my YouTube channel. And watch the simulcast in video. That's at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, we were just talking about how the whites are invading the Black Hills they're breaking the treaty. And not only the whites, but the white soldiers. And they're setting up forts. And Custer put up a fort with the 7th Cavalry in the Black Hills. And they were cutting down a big pine for a flagpole. And the Indians are like, what are you doing? You can't erect a flag of the United States here. This is our territory. And so, in anger, they went and they chopped the pole down. And Seville ordered them to stop, but they didn't pay any attention to him. And he walked over to Red Cloud's office, who had an office there at the fort, and begged him to stop the warriors, and Red Cloud refused. And he said they're only expressing their anger. They're a little pissed off that you're going to put up a flag here on our land. Now, infuriated, Seville now ordered one of his workmen to ride to the soldiers' town, that's Fort Robinson, and to request a company of cavalrymen to come to his aid. So when the demonstrating warriors saw the man riding toward the fort, they guessed his mission. They rushed for their teepee camps, armed and painted themselves for battle, and they went to intercept the cavalrymen. There were only 26 bluecoats led by a lieutenant. The warriors encircled them, fired their guns into the air, and yelled a few war cries. The lieutenant, Emmett Crawford, betrayed no fear. Through the great cloud of dust that was thrown up by the milling warriors, he kept his men moving steadily toward the agency. Some of the younger warriors began riding in close, colliding their ponies with troopers' mounts, determined to precipitate a fight. Now, let me stop here. It looks as though, and it's true, that the Indian warriors were the aggressors here. But they know that this dispatch of soldiers is going to get cavalrymen. And so this time it was not another troop of cavalry which came galloping to Lieutenant Crawford's rescue, but a band of agency Sioux that were led by Young Man Afraid of His Horses. We've heard him before. Son of Old Man Afraid of His Horses. The agency Indians broke through the ring of warriors and formed a protective wall around the bluecoats and escorted them to the stockade. The belligerent warriors were still so angry, however, that they tried to burn down the stockade, and only the persuasive oratory of Red Dog and Old Man Afraid of His Horses stopped the demonstration. Again, Red Cloud refused to interfere. He was not surprised when many of the protesters packed up, dismantled their teepees, and started back north to spend the winter off the reservation. And by the way, before any of you might loosely try to align this with riots that have been going on in the United States over the past few months, the burning of buildings and things like that, remember, that wasn't in response to an invasion of your land. Totally different thing. What these men were doing, they were trying to stop. You notice they didn't fire on the soldiers. They tried to stop them from going to alert Custer that he needed to bring more soldiers in. And they tried to stop them. Indians came out and protected the Bluecoats and said, guys, back off. And they escorted them to the stockade. And then they tried to burn the stockade. The Indians did. This was in response to they're very angry after seeing their people massacred, after seeing their lands taken away, after having a treaty that they're now seeing broken over and over and over again. So Red Cloud didn't interfere. They had proved to him that there were still Sioux warriors who would never take lightly any invasion of Pahasapa. And yet apparently Red Cloud did not realize that he was losing these young men forever. He's trying to maintain the peace. He's telling his own hot-headed warriors, calm down. Okay, we'll take care of this. But he's starting to lose them. And they had rejected his leadership for that of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, neither of whom had ever lived on a reservation or taken a white man's handout. And by the spring of 1875, tales of Black Hills gold had brought hundreds of miners up the Missouri River and out upon the Thieves' Road. The Army sent soldiers to stop the flow of all these new prospectors coming in. And a few were removed from the hills, but no legal action was taken against them, and they soon returned to prospect their claims. So the United States didn't hold them responsible for breaking the treaty. General Crook, the Plains Indians called him 3 Stars instead of Gray Wolf, remember Gray Wolf, Crook, and they called him 3 Stars, made a reconnaissance of the Black Hills and found more than 1,000 miners in the area. 3 Stars politely informed them that they were violating the law and ordered them to leave, but he made no effort to enforce the orders. So they pretty much brushed him off. Alarmed by the white man's gold craze and the Army's failure to protect their territory, Red Cloud and Spotted Tail made strong protests to Washington officials. The Great Father's response was to send out a commission to, quote, treat with the Sioux Indians for the relinquishment of the Black Hills. What? Just a few years earlier, Grant had said, this is your territory forever, until they found out there's gold. Now he wants to send out to write a treaty with the Sioux to surrender and not even surrender, relinquish the Black Hills. In other words, the time had come to take away one more piece of territory that had been assigned to the Indians in perpetuity. And as usual, the commission was made up of politicians, missionaries, traders, and military officers. Senator William B. Allison of Iowa was the chairman. Reverend Samuel D. Hinman, who had long endeavored to replace the Santee's religion and culture with Christianity, was the principal missionary. I wonder if Hinman, there's a Hinman Plaza along the tollway going around Chicago in Illinois. I wonder if that's named after him. I'll have to look that up. But Hinman, who had long endeavored to replace the Santee's religion with Christianity and the culture of Christianity. And he was the principal missionary. General Alfred Terry represented the military. John Collins, he was a post trader at Fort Laramie, represented the commercial interests. So to ensure representation of non-agency as well as agency Indians, runners were sent to invite Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and other wild, quote-unquote, chiefs to the council. Half-breed Louis Richard took the government letter to Sitting Bull and read it to him. I want you to go and tell the Great Father, Sitting Bull replied, that I do not want to sell any land to the government. And he picked up a pinch of dust and added, not even as much as this. Crazy Horse was also opposed to selling of Sioux land, especially the Black Hills. He refused to attend the council, but Little Big Man would go as an observer for the Free Oglalas. Now, you remember the movie with Dustin Hoffman out of the 60s, The Little Big Man, or Little Big Man. That's a story about this fellow. And if the commissioners expected to meet quietly with a few compliant chiefs and arrange an inexpensive trade, they were in for a rude surprise. When they arrived at the meeting place on White River between Red Cloud and Spotted Tail agencies, the plains for miles around were covered with Sioux camps, immense herds of grazing ponies. And from the Missouri River on the east to the Bighorn country on the west, all the nations of the Sioux and many of their Cheyenne and Arapaho friends had gathered there. More than 20,000 Sioux were out across those plains, in villages that they had set up. Few of them had ever seen a copy of the Treaty of 1868, but a goodly number knew that the meaning of a certain clause in that sacred document, quote, "No treaty for the cessation or the cession of any part of the reservation herein described shall be of any validity or force unless executed and signed by at least 3/4 of all the adult male Indians occupying or interested in the same." They had 20,000 men there. Do you think they were going to find 3/4 of them to sign this treaty to give away the Black Hills? So even if the commissioners had been able to intimidate or buy off every chief present, they could not have obtained more than a few dozen signatures from those thousands of angry, well-armed warriors who were determined to keep every pinch of dust and blade of grass within their territory. So on September 20th of 1875, the commission assembled under the shade of a large tarpaulin, which had been strung beside a lone cottonwood on the rolling plain, and the commissioners seated themselves on chairs facing the thousands of Indians who were moving restlessly about in the distance. A troop of 120 cavalrymen on white horses filed in from Fort Robinson and drew up in a line behind the canvas shelter. Spotted Tail arrived in a wagon from his agency, but Red Cloud had announced that he would not be there. A few other chiefs drifted in, and then suddenly a cloud of dust boiled up from the crest of a distant hill. A band of Indians came galloping down upon the council's shelter. The warriors were dressed for battle, and as they came nearer, they swerved to encircle the commissioners, fired their rifles skyward, and gave out a few whoops before trotting off to form a line immediately in the rear of the cavalrymen. By this time, a second band of Indians was approaching, and thus, tribe by tribe, the Sioux warriors came in, making their demonstrations of power until a great circle of several thousand Indians enclosed the council. Now the chiefs came forward, well satisfied that they'd given the commissioners something strong to think about. They sat in a semicircle, facing the nervous white men, eager to hear what they would have to say about the Black Hills. Could you imagine that? These white guys that want to propose ignoring the treaty and taking away the Black Hills are now sitting with 20,000 Sioux all encamped out on the prairies around them, and now at least 2,000 Sioux warriors painted for war, with weapons firing in the air, encircling the 120 cavalrymen and the council tent. And then the chiefs come in, they sit down in front of the commissioners and go, "Okay, what do you got to say about the Black Hills?" Imagine that scene. Imagine being in that moment. Now, during the few days that the commissioners had been at Fort Robinson, observing the mood of the Indians, they recognized the futility of trying to buy the Black Hills, and they decided instead to negotiate for mineral rights. "We have now to ask you if you're willing to give our people the right to mine in the Black Hills." That was Senator Allison. He said, "As long as gold or other valuable minerals are found, for a fair and just sum that we will pay you. If you're so willing, we'll make a bargain with you for this right. When the gold or other valuable minerals are taken away, the country will again be yours to dispose of in any manner that you may wish." Now, Spotted Tail took this proposal as a ludicrous joke. Was the commissioner asking the Indians to lend the Black Hills to the white men for a while? His rejoinder was to ask. Pardon me, I still have my ringers not shut off. Sorry about that, folks. He was saying, are you asking us to lend the Black Hills to the white men for a while? His rejoinder was to ask Senator Allison if he would lend him a team of mules on such terms. It will be hard for our government to keep the whites out of the hills, Allison continued. To try to do so will give you and our government great trouble, because the whites that may wish to go there are very numerous. Do you hear this? He's saying, we can't uphold the law because people are going to want to be there anyway. I suppose now would be a really good time for me to shut off my phone, now that that's the third time I've gotten a call while doing this. Let me silence my phone. There we go. Hopefully that works. So now, imagine, this is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Now, the senator's ignorance of the Plains Indians' feeling for the Powder River country was displayed in this next proposal. He said this: there's another country lying far toward the setting sun, over which you roam and hunt, and which territory is yet unceded, extending to the summit of the Bighorn Mountains. It does not seem to be of great value or use to you, and our people think that they would like to have the portion of it I've described. Now, while Senator Allison's incredible demands were being translated, Red Dog rode up on a pony and announced that he had a message from Red Cloud, the absent Oglala chief. Probably anticipating the greed of the commissioners, he requested a week's recess to give the tribes time to hold councils of their own in which to consider all proposals concerning their lands. The commissioners considered the matter and agreed to give the Indians 3 days for holding tribal councils. So on September 23rd, they would expect definite replies from the chiefs. And they didn't want a negative reply. So the idea of giving up their last great hunting ground was so preposterous that none of the chiefs even discussed it during their councils. They did debate very earnestly the question of the Black Hills. Some reasoned that if the United States government had no intention of enforcing the treaty and keeping the white miners out, then perhaps the Indians should demand payment, a great deal of money, for the yellow metal taken from the hills. If I was going to deal for money there, I'd say, we need to have Indian agents there, and we need to have, for every bit of gold that's taken out, we get 50%, or whatever. So others were determined not to sell at any price. This was their sacred place. And so the Black Hills belonged to the Indians, they argued. If the blue coat soldiers would not drive out the miners, then the warriors will. That's the thing here, folks. This is their land. This is doubly their land by treaty with the United States. And so it's already been decided just a handful of years earlier. So on September 23rd, the commissioners, riding in army ambulances from Fort Robinson and escorted by a somewhat enlarged cavalry troop, again arrived at the council shelter. Red Cloud was there early, and he protested vigorously about the large number of soldiers. Just as he was prepared, and remember, this is their land. You're bringing an army in here. I can bring 2,000 of my warriors. You don't have a right to do that. So Red Cloud was there early, and just as he was preparing to give his preliminary speech to the commissioners, a sudden commotion broke out amongst the warriors far in the distance. About 300 Oglalas who had come in from the Powder River country trotted their ponies down a slope, occasionally firing off rifles. Some were chanting a song in Sioux. The Black Hills is my land and I love it, and whoever interferes will hear this gun. And that's the song they were chanting. And this was, I want to see the reference. I'm going to cite the reference for this. If I can, hold on. And it's not letting me get it. There it is. Oh, that's just Gilbert's book. He had written this down. So the Black Hills is my land, and I love it, and whoever interferes will hear this gun. They're chanting this song as they're riding in. An Indian mounted on a gray horse forced his way through the ranks of warriors gathered around the canvas shelter. He was Crazy Horse's envoy, Little Big Man. Stripped for battle and wearing 2 revolvers belted to his waist, "I will kill the first chief who speaks for selling the Black Hills," he shouted out. He danced his horse across the open space between the commissioners and the chiefs. Young men afraid of his horses and a group of unofficial Sioux policemen immediately swarmed around Little Big Man and moved him away. The chiefs and the commissioners, however, must have guessed that Little Big Man voiced the feelings of most of the warriors present. General Terry suggested to his fellow commissioners that they board the army ambulances and return to the safety of Fort Robinson. Gentlemen, I think it's time for us to leave. And so after giving the Indians a few days to calm down, the commissioners quietly arranged a meeting with 20 chiefs in the headquarters building of the Red Cloud Agency. During 3 days of speech-making, the chiefs made it quite clear to the Great Father's representatives that the Black Hills could not be bought cheaply, if at any price. Spotted Tail finally grew impatient with the commissioners and asked them to submit a definite proposal in writing. See, they've taught the Indians something, haven't they? You give this to me in writing. Official. The offer was $400,000 a year for the mineral rights. $400,000 a year. Or if the Sioux wished to sell the hills outright, the price would be $6 million, payable in 15 annual installments. Now, this was a markdown price indeed, considered that one Black Hills mine alone yielded more than $500 million in gold. And they said, you can give it to us in $6 million over 15 years. See, the gold didn't mean anything to them. It was their land. And so Red Cloud didn't even appear for the final meeting, letting Spotted Tail speak for all the Sioux. Spotted Tail rejected both offers firmly. The Black Hills were not for lease or for sale. Period. See ya. The commissioners packed up. They returned to Washington, reported their failure to persuade the Sioux to relinquish the Black Hills, and recommended that Congress disregard the wishes of the Indians and appropriate a sum fixed, quote, as a fair equivalent of the value of the hills, end quote. And this forced purchase of the Black Hills should be presented to the Indians as a finality, they said. This is our final offer. With that's coming a very not-so-shrouded threat. And thus was set in motion a chain of actions which would bring the greatest defeat ever suffered by the United States Army in its wars with the Indians, and ultimately would destroy forever the freedom of the Northern Plains Indians. On November 9th, 1875, E.C. Watkins, a special inspector for the Indian Bureau, reported to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs that Plains Indians living outside reservations were fed and well armed, were lofty and independent in their attitudes, and were therefore a threat to the reservation system. Inspector Watkins recommended that troops be sent against these uncivilized Indians, and in the winter, the sooner the better, and whip them into subjugation, or subjection is what he said. And that was, there is a quote here too, or a footnote here, that this was a part of the U.S. Congress, the 44th, their first session. This is a House executive document where E.C. Watkins, who was a special inspector for the Indian Bureau, reported that we need to send troops against these uncivilized Indians in the winter, the sooner the better, and whip them into subjection. Meaning, well, we can't buy their land, so let's make sure we take it by force. November 22nd of 1875, the Secretary of War, W. Belknap, warned of trouble in the Black Hills. Quote, unless something is done to obtain possession of that section for white miners who have been strongly attracted there by reports of rich deposits of the precious metal. End quote. December 3rd of 1875, a week later, Commissioner of Indian Affairs Edward P. Smith ordered Sioux and Cheyenne agents to notify all Indians off reservations to come in and report to their agencies by January 31st of 1876, or a military force would be sent to compel them. February 1st of 1876, the Secretary of the Interior noted that the Secretary of War notified the Secretary of War that the time given the hostile Indians, quote unquote, to come to their reservations had expired, and that he was turning them over to the military authorities for such action as the Army might deem proper under the circumstances. These are all part of congressional record, by the way. February 7th of 1867, 6 days later, the War Department authorized General Sheridan, commanding the Military Division of the Missouri, to commence operations against the hostile Sioux, including the bands Under Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. On February 8th, 1867, General Sheridan ordered Generals Crook and Terry to begin preparations for military operations in the direction of the headwaters of the Powder, Tongue, Rosebud, and Bighorn rivers, where Crazy Horse and his allies frequented, quote unquote. So once this machinery of government began moving, it became an inexorable force and mindless, uncontrollable. When runners went out from the agencies in late December to warn the non-agency chiefs to come in, heavy snows blanketed the northern plains. Blizzards and severe cold made it impossible for some couriers to return until weeks after the January 31st deadline. It would have been impossible to move women and children by ponies and travois. Had a few thousand hostiles somehow managed to reach the agencies, they would have starved there. On the reservations during the late winter, food supplies were so short that hundreds of Indians left in March to go north in search of meager government rations. And in January, a courier found Sitting Bull camped near the mouth of the Powder. The Hunkpapa chief sent the messenger back to the agent, informing him that he would consider the order to come in, but could not do so until the moon when the green grass is up. In other words, fuck off till spring. All right, folks, we have got to call it a quit for tonight at that point. There's a lot to come in this story. You can see the buildup that is coming. So you guys, thanks for being here. I appreciate all of you listening. Come on over tomorrow night, 23 hours from now, and we'll get into more of this story of the war over the Black Hills. Good night.